The company is super interesting because kind of under the hood, you have something like 200 engineers that are supporting traffic of like 560 million unique monthly visitors. So it's like this massive site and it's a very small team. I love the culture of sort of being able to do more with less. And I think that we've really proven that possible at X, like doing sort of big things with a very small team. You're able to move incredibly fast because there's essentially no management layer, which is pretty wild. So like a good example of this is like my title is head of product, but like on a day-to-day basis, you will find me like writing cold emails for our sales team to send and personally jumping on like customer support calls with companies. And I think that goes like all the way up to Linda and Elon.
My guest today is Chris Bak, product leader at X, formerly known as Twitter. Chris has sold 2 companies for $100 million, and he is also a master at shitposting. We spoke about the art of shitposting, what it's like to work directly for Elon Musk, and how to stand out in today's tough jobs market. Chris is extremely funny, and you won't be able to guess how many product managers X still has. If you enjoy our conversation, please like and subscribe to support this podcast. All right, Chris, welcome. Super excited to have you here. So why don't we start by talking about something you're really great at, the art of shitposting.
So fun.
Yeah, like why do you do it, man? Like why do you do it and how has it helped you in your professional efforts?
Posting is just what comes naturally. I think when I think about communicating with people on the internet, it's very different, I think, from my natural personality where I have to be more serious. And so all of these kind of like sarcastic, jokey things that are in my head, it just turns out to be a really good outlet. I think separately from that, when I got super active on Twitter as a platform, so I've always run companies and it turns out that it's just a really good way of attracting lots of tech founders and possible buyers of software and stuff to our profiles. And so when I think about sales, it's this funnel of getting people's attention and then telling a really good story. And so shitposting just tends to be a really good way of getting people's attention, for better or for worse, in this tech world. And so it became really a really kind of amazing channel for us at my last company as we were selling into different companies. And it was the way that a lot of companies discovered our product. And so, yeah, it's always been some mix of like 50% really fun and kind of comes naturally, and then 50% for business reasons. I spend a lot of time on X shitposting. So
got it. And like, why do you think people on X love shitpost so much?
I think it's kind of natural to the platform. I think there's always been this element there when you have some of these accounts like 3-year Letterman, who's kind of in the sports world, and even some VCs who were pretty early to the platform making sarcastic remarks toward each other and toward different startups. And I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. You see some of that behavior on LinkedIn and certainly like Reddit and stuff. But I think a lot of it actually comes from Twitter as the original platform where a lot of this stuff started. I think, look, like the nature of Twitter going back 15 years has always been this kind of town square platform where news breaks. And so people, I think much more so on Twitter versus other platforms, are super reactive in real time to things that you're putting out into the world. Like some of these other platforms, it's a much, I think, like slower burn, but you can, with a decent following, you can post something and you'll have 10 comments on it within a minute. You'll have 100 comments on it within an hour. Like it doesn't take a lot to sort of engage people. And I think that there's just some of us sickos who find it really fun to confuse people around posting fake news or posting something super controversial. Like it just gets really old. I think for me, just seeing kind of like the same types of posts all the time. Now, Ironically, I actually think that there's becoming too much shit posting and too much bad shit posting on X, but that's sort of a separate topic of discussion. So
yeah, it used to be that a lot of content were just like very cringe threads, and then it just made me want to shit post and make fun of some of the stuff. So
Yeah, I think that the best creators on any platform always evolve to where that platform's going, and it's easy to spot these trends. I mean, I think that on that note, there's probably a really good opportunity for somebody to come in and be sort of the Wikipedia guy again, because you saw a ton of that content in 2020, 2021. There was this massive like backlash against it, but also a lot of those people who were doing that type of content grew their accounts to have 400,000, 600,000, a million, 1.2 million followers over that time period. So like it worked at that time period. And now I think a lot of those creators have these massive followings and they're figuring out like how to be sort of readapt to this new world. But because so many people made fun of that style, it's sort of a style that's like, it's been on the decline for a while, but now I don't see that type of content anymore. And I'm not sure if it's an algorithm problem where our algorithm just hates it, or if it's people, there's sort of probably an opportunity for people to be doing that type of content and get some traction on it. But
yeah, this stuff probably comes and goes in waves. So, but like, I would love to,
for sure.
I mean, you're really like, I think I'm pretty good at shitposting, but like, I think you're really the master at this. So like, do you have like a 5-step process for coming up with shitposts, or is like, how do you come with this stuff?
Yeah, people get frustrated. I mean, I think it's like a Jerry Seinfeld thing. He's like, when I was early in my career, I went to this paid comedy class and I was supposed to teach these people how to be comedians. And he's like, the fact that you're here indicates that none of you are going to become comedians. So like when people sell like the master class on like how to shitpost, I think it's like one of these things. It can be learned, over time. I think it just like, it comes down to me to a certain level of sarcasm and humor. And like, I don't think I'm the best by any means. Like tons of small accounts make me laugh. They're just not super consistent with it. I think that's what it takes to really grow the account, is just the consistency of posting every single day, multiple times per day in some cases. And then I think also just being very specific with who you're trying to reach and how you're trying to reach them. And if that's through humor, you kind of have to try to bring the humor every day. And it's hard because you're trying to not recycle too much content. You're trying not to fully rip off other funny things that you see, but you're trying to participate in the conversation. And I'd say on your question, it's like ultimately a lot of the humor that you see on X today it's a remix platform. Like there are these 10 things that just keep going viral, and they will continue to go viral 5 years from now, because like a lot of this stuff is just like evergreen internet humor. These are like why did the chicken cross the road, or like fart jokes or something. They're just like, they're always funny to a certain set of people, or they're like, it's funny to make fun of those types of jokes to a certain set of people. So yeah, like you said, I mean, the evolution of what's popular and what's not, it sort of ebbs and flows in different waves. And yeah, there's been a lot of people that have sort of flooded into the market, but I think that a lot of people enjoy consuming that type of content. And so that, I think, for people like us who are putting lots of content out, it's super rewarding to see that people enjoy it, and the engagement that you get online is like, it's kind of real dopamine that drives you to create the next one. But yeah, there's no like process. I don't schedule any of my posts. I've never used, like, I don't have any drafts. Like my drafts folder is empty. I just like see a thing, remix it, or like think of a thing and then post it in real time, and try not to overthink the process. But it's kind of a frustrating answer because people want to get better at this stuff. And I would say a lot of it just comes from, you can consume a lot of the humor and you can kind of remix it. And then over time, you'll start to get better at taking like a meme that you see and making it 10% different or 10% better or something like that. That's all this platform really is. And then all that content ends up on Reddit 2 days later, and LinkedIn 2 weeks later, and Facebook like a month later. So it has this like burn off across other platforms that also, I think you can find inspiration from the seriousness of other platforms. Like a lot of my content is targeted at this sort of seriousness of LinkedIn and sort of the absurdity of like, everybody has a sense of humor. Sometimes maybe my sense of humor is like kind of weird or out there, but we all have a different sense of humor. And it's absurd that there are platforms like LinkedIn that have 300 or 400 million people and nobody's shit posting there. Like, why are we all, people are funny in the office, people are funny online, people are funny who I work with remotely. And it's like, why are we not bringing any of that to this sort of like professional environment? Like we should be able to tell jokes there and say sarcastic things there. And so a lot of that, like, I think that some of the shit posting comes a little bit naturally, just like poking fun at that. But yeah, there's no process. It's like the world is a very funny place. And so if you pay attention, you're going to find funny shit to talk about if you care. So
yeah, I guess if there's any process, like it sounds like a lot of your shit posting is inspired by current events or by some more try hard or cringe posts from like another platform, right? It's kind of like a remix of what that 100%. Is. Yeah. So why don't we take like a specific example? So like I found one of your shit posts about, I'll just read it out loud. So like, so basically it goes like this. My local dry cleaner was struggling to pay the bills. He was losing $10,000 a month. I told him to use AI to transform his business. He took my advice. He bought a ChatGPT subscription. And now his business is totally transformed. He now loses $10,020 a month. And then it got like 77,000 likes. And I think you posted this back in May. Maybe this was when ChatGPT came out, or do you remember what inspired you to make this?
I do vaguely. So you'll notice that I have a lot of dry cleaning posts. One of my good friends, shout out to Stan, who's in Pennsylvania. His parents run a couple dry cleaning shops out in the Philadelphia area called Love and Care Cleaners. And so he kind of grew up in this like dry cleaning family, and we always talk about it. And I think it's like one of those things where I read one of those terrible posts. It's like, here are the 99 ways that you're not using GPT to like transform your life. It's like, I read that on my screen, and then I'm texting with Stan, and I'm like, oh, like your family, like you're in the dry cleaning business. Like I need like a example of like an SMB entrepreneur who I can apply this terrible advice to, and then point out why this is terrible advice. Because I think it's like everybody, I have a whole string of posts in that direction, but it's like all of this advice that we give in the tech industry sounds insane to 99.9% of people who have jobs. Like, what is it? What is a chief of staff? Like, why would you raise venture money? Why do I need ChatGPT to do my job? Like, we actually need more like in-home care nurses and stuff like that. Like, is ChatGPT going to help with that problem? And so it's just like these sort of like truisms that end up going viral are so frustrating to me, because it's like people will say that ChatGPT is like the end of jobs. It's like, yeah, maybe it's the end of your job, but like that's like a tiny fraction of all the jobs. And like I think throughout history, people have adapted pretty quick. And so I hate these like kind of oversimplifications that end up doing really well and going viral. And I think at that time in May, yeah, it was like when maybe like GPT-3 or something was coming out. And so there was just this massive wave of all of these AI newsletters and AI accounts and people talking about how this is like the end of the world as we know it. And it's like, no, that's fundamentally wrong. But I think some of that is spending time deep in the timeline and understanding the humor. Like, you can't just say this post is bad. That's just like, it's not going to do well. You sort of need to paint this more controversial picture. You need to paint like a really funny take of what's a funny business where I could apply this sort of cringe LinkedIn-like advice around how AI is going to transform every industry, and be like, oh yeah, well, how's it going to help my buddy's parents who run a dry cleaner in Philadelphia? Like, how's ChatGPT going to help them? And so I think that's where it's like, there's funny stuff happening in the world, but you can take some of the funny and or serious content on X or on Twitter, and you can sort of remix it to things that are sort of like really happening in your own life. Like, a lot of the stuff that I post is directly inspired by what my friends' parents do, or funny stuff that my kids have done that day. And like, you can take these kind of like funny one-off things and then find some way to weave cold plunges and saunas and AI newsletters and ChatGPT and product managers and work from home, and just all of these trends that like, you see that content going viral a lot with humorous posts. Great. Like, take 20% of that piece, take 80% of something that you witnessed in real life, and like combine them together.
Got it. That makes sense. And like a few months ago, during the whole OpenAI turmoil, like when Sam Altman got fired and was brought back, like, dude, you were like on fire, man. You had like multiple really great shit posts every day. Like, what was so funny about this situation to you that like led you to go on this bender? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that it's maybe one of like three things that have ever happened in the tech world, to kind of off the top of my head, where it's like, oh, there will be an entire show made about this saga. And when you're in the middle of it, you don't know how long it's going to last. I mean, I was pumping out so much content during that. Like, I told my coworkers, it was like, this is the shitpost Super Bowl. Like, you just don't, there's a lot of funny stuff that happens in tech, but you don't get these moments all the time. I mean, I signed up for Twitter back in 2014. I never used it. In end of 2020, I was bored at my corporate job, kind of post-acquisition, and I started putting out tweets. And at first they were kind of serious, and then I tried to make them more humorous. But like in that period of the end of 2020 through when the OpenAI thing happened, I mean, really you only had like the SVB stuff was kind of crazy, but it was it was like a show will probably be made about Silicon Valley Bank and the failure there. But it was so scary. It was kind of like a hard thing to shitpost about because it was like there's actual startups that have real money that's potentially locked up or potentially gone. COVID was another thing, like this massive transformation as all these companies were doing layoffs and shifting to at-home work. And it's like those are kind of historical groundbreaking events that affect tech in their own unique ways. It's also kind of tough to be lighthearted about that stuff, I think, on such a consistent basis. The OpenAI thing was amazing because it's like you have these like incredible characters, right? You have this sort of like bumbling board that has no idea what they're doing. You have Adam D'Angelo from Quora, who's been irrelevant for like 12 years and is somehow like at the front and center of this. You have like Sam Altman's history with Y Combinator coming into play. You have like Elon's opinion on the ordeal. You have Paul Graham weighing. It's like every single voice in tech is affiliated with OpenAI in some way. Like people are working there, or they invested in the company, or they invested in a rival company and they want OpenAI to fail. It's funny because now Microsoft's involved and like I think Sam Altman just went from being the CEO of an $80 billion company to being like a product director at Microsoft. Like, how the hell did that happen? And so it's like every twist and turn is hilarious. Like it just is. And so I think the entire timeline in tech was doing an amazing job, like doubling down on this. But I just sort of treated it like my mission. I was actually like on vacation, I think, during that period. So I literally had like no other work stuff happening. So I guess that's the sort of full force that you get when you apply my sick and twisted humorous mind to an event of just like, sorry, family, sorry, kids, go sit on the beach. I'm going to be up in the room just tweeting about OpenAI. But yeah, it was kind of an amazing 72-hour period or however long it lasted. So
yeah, this is like way more entertaining to do than just like reading a book on the beach. This is way more entertaining.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you got to go full content creator during the downtime, I think. So yeah, it was fun.
Do you think in the past, some people have told me that like shitposting shows recruiters that you're not serious, or maybe your current employer, and like you should stay away from it? Like, how do you feel about that?
I mean, I guess I wouldn't want to work at those companies, so I don't care.
Yeah,
like I mean, really, it's like there's always this line of. The joke was always people go to LinkedIn to get hired and people come to Twitter to get fired. Right. So it like there's this like there's this sort of like truism to that where if you think about like, I don't know, I couldn't name anybody I've ever heard of who's like posted LinkedIn content and has gotten fired because of it. But tons of people, right? Whether it's like actually really shitty, problematic stuff that they said in the moment, and maybe that happened 15 years ago, and maybe they're sorry, maybe they're not. But like tons of people have gotten canceled because of their content that they put on Twitter. And I think that's where, that, like I said earlier, like Twitter over the last 15 years has always been a place where it's like real-time thoughts, real-time news, real-time information. And I think that actually a lot of that stuff, even by sort of the original Twitter 1.0 regime, was like, it was allowed. Like people could say really offensive stuff, and a lot of the times their account wouldn't get suspended and they wouldn't get taken down, and then those posts get resurfaced or whatever. But yeah, man, I think like stuff like that is really challenging. But like shit posts, I think it's a totally different lane. Like I like to think that you have to be hard pressed to be like deeply offended by one of my posts. I think if you can't, and like that's where I try to be self-deprecating with it. I post like hilarious and bad stuff that happens at X, where I now work, all the time. Like I will be critical toward Elon. I will be critical toward like the way that we're, dealing with advertisers. I'll be critical toward like decisions that our product team is making. I'll be critical toward our own vendors, right? Like I had a very awkward meeting 5 months ago where I was tweeting a bunch of negative shit about Mark Benioff. And that day I was meeting with the Salesforce team and doing some stuff on their account. And like, they definitely saw that content, and I forgot that I had the Salesforce meeting later that day. Oops. And like, it is what it is. Like, if that meeting does not go well because of something that I put out, because the people that work at this like massive company are so deeply offended by like a joke that I said, then like, let it be. And so I do think that's like, it's an easy thing to say, maybe as somebody who doesn't have to worry about sort of where their next job is coming from. I recognize that not all people are in that position. And I think that there's a bunch of really shitty companies out there that have basically used free speech on all sorts of internet platforms, and have sort of a lot of these like bigger companies will now, implement this technology as part of their hiring process to go crawl the internet and find everything you've ever said and just look for the most mild stuff that they can be offended by, because that's their business model. They're like, everybody has maybe crossed some imaginary line at some point. And so we're going to go charge like Chipotle to go dig up all of your old tweets. And like, that's where I think it gets scary, where, we don't want, there needs to be a platform that allows a certain amount of freedom of speech. And I think that X has provided that platform. But yeah, I mean, I think in tech, people are mostly immune from not getting a job over free speech, I would like to think. And if companies are out there doing that, then those are just companies, like you said, that I probably wouldn't want to work for.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Like, I want to work for a company where like the memes and shit posts are flying around internally in Slack too, not just like publicly, like people that have a sense of humor. If you have a sense of humor, it kind of sucks to work for that person. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Why would you want to do that? And I also think quickly on the other side, there's a ton of opportunity that comes out of shit posting. And I think that's the piece that's actually underappreciated. Like, I met Elon, who then bought my company for a ton of money and has provided us all with immense opportunity within X because of shit posting. Like, he followed me on his own platform that he bought, and we then met, and somebody recommended that like he follow my content. And so he did. And then we met at this like dinner party thing and it was just like, there's like the serendipity of stuff like that, where people are creating companies, people's companies are getting bought. We hired way before we were ever doing business with Twitter and before we worked at X. Like, we were hiring a ton of great candidates off the platform because we read their content. We liked the way that they thought. We liked the writing style. And so our VP of operations, our head of product, one of our engineers, like, we're all hired from just people following my account over the years and DMing me and being like, hey, you seem like a fun guy to work with. Like, are you guys hiring? So the serendipity of the other side of that, of like, shit posting can, if you take it too far, it can possibly hurt your career. But I think in general, for the vast majority of us who are doing it, it's super net positive.
Yeah, that's a great transition point to talk about your main thing, which is like, you founded and sold two companies, focus on helping companies hire great people. And now you work at X, I think, on the hiring product. So maybe you can briefly recap what you think is kind of like broken about the hiring process right now, and like how you plan to fix it with X.
Yeah. I mean, all of hiring is, first of all, it's a massive industry, right? So you have, in the US, you have about $200 billion that gets spent by companies trying to hire talent. About 20 billion of that is spent on online job platforms, right? So that's basically LinkedIn and Indeed are sort of the duopoly there. And then there's like ZipRecruiter and a whole bunch of other platforms that are like a tenth of the size. But what that means is $200 billion spent on recruiting. 20 billion of it goes to online platforms. It means $180 billion is going toward like old school suit and tie recruiting firms or staffing firms and stuff like that. And so that's crazy in and of itself, that you have such a legacy industry that is still so like hyper dependent on things happening offline. And then if you look at what does happen online, the ways in which people find jobs has not evolved since like the very early like monster.com, Ladders, Craigslist days, where you have like a category and you need to basically like search by category or search by job title. I mean, the crazy thing about that is that like, if you think about the butterfly effect of job search, like where you work is one of the most important, like 2, 3, 4 decisions that most people make in their lifetimes. Right. And so the butterfly effect of like starting where you work and what job you get and what jobs you don't accept and where you sort of look for opportunity is hugely impactful on all of our lives. But the fact that like, even at sort of the most senior level, you take somebody like a salesperson and you put them on like Indeed or LinkedIn, like, should that salesperson type in salesperson or sales jobs or account executive or senior account executive or account manager? Like, you have like, there's no sense of normalization with job titles. So you have like 20 different people that are all doing the exact same job, but like Snowflake and, Salesforce and Adobe and Amazon and any other big tech company, they all call that job something completely different. And so now when you're looking for a job, or now when recruiters are approaching you with opportunity, your entire existence as like a working person gets boiled down to like basically like your job title and maybe a couple other bullet points. And so the fact that like that's how job search starts is insane. And so what we did at my last company was companies applied to people. People didn't apply to companies. So you would come in and you would fill out like a very lengthy, extensive profile about everything, like what your interests are outside of work, what you're hoping to make, what's the minimum amount of money that you would accept, like where you kind of stand in terms of a hybrid versus in office versus remote work capability. Are you willing to relocate? We just get like a ton of sort of information about you. And then we start to gather all these details about your work. And then we can sort of use that to get the same level of information from companies. And we can basically treat job search a lot more like Tinder and a lot less like a Craigslist or Indeed or something like that, where we're sort of like matchmaking opportunities to people. And I think it was like hugely popular with candidates, and employers liked it too, because this old idea of like posting a job and paying money to post a job and then like, let's sit back and wait to see which candidates are on the market right now and actually apply to this thing is just really old school. And so we think that there's sort of a better way, especially through like LLMs and some of the things that we can use now to sort of consolidate what companies are looking for and what candidates are looking for. And like X as a platform is really a great way to do that, because you have a ton of information about people on X. And if you sort of get the right jobs and you can engage the right employers, it's sort of a natural place, like as you're scrolling the feed, to like scroll by different job opportunities. And you can sort of like Tinder style say like, I like this one, I want to see more, or I don't like this one, or I'm not in the market right now. And so it's like a very easy way to casually put opportunities in front of a whole lot of different people.
I think the good thing about X is that it kind of shows what people are actually doing rather than what they want people to think they're doing, right? It's like people are sharing the stuff they're building on X, or like shitposting, or actually what they're thinking about. So
yeah.
Like right now, like a lot of people have lost their tech job, right? Like there's a lot of layoffs happening. And one thing that has already really annoyed me is like you talk to a recruiter and they're like, oh, do you have like 10 years of experience? Do you manage like 20 people? Do you work at FAN before or something? This is like very lazy filters that people use. So I guess flipping it around, do you have any advice for job seekers right now to like stand out from this crap that people used to filter people out?
Yeah. I mean, I think well, not all, but I think the vast majority of hiring has gone toward results driven hiring. And that's always been the case. I think that throughout the cycles of the economy, there's always cycles that have been, everything is so crazy and we're not really paying attention to who we're hiring and we're growing so fast. And then the economy shrinks, or that market size shrinks, or it stalls. And then you sort of look around and you go, why do we have all these people? And that's happening, I think, in a big way. And so I think the advice would be, when I look at I think the first thing is, the reality is like, we're working hard at X to change job search, but like the vast majority of jobs are still found through recruiters, or still found through these traditional job boards. And so I think people get upset by that. I think especially engineers and people in tech, they get upset by that, but it's like, view hiring as a game to be played and play the game well. So what that means is, yes, companies are going to use filtering on resumes, which means that they're going to be looking for keywords on resumes. And if you don't have the right keywords, you might not be qualified for the role, or you'll be automatically rejected for the role. So play the game. And assuming that the keywords apply to you, like put relevant keywords from the job description. Like these are very simple matching technologies that companies use. Like they have keywords in their job description and they're looking for like how closely that aligns to the resume. So put in a little bit of extra work and like based on the jobs or the specific company that you're applying to, add those things to your resume. I think most resumes, it's sort of like the sales 101 with like new founders is, don't sell features, sell the solution. I think a lot of people feature sell themselves. I did this, I did that, I did this, I did that. It's like, that's not what a company wants to hear right now. A company wants to know, did you increase revenue? Did you cut costs? Did you help hire like some amazing people who transformed the business? Like based on your role and your responsibilities, you're like moving the company forward or you're holding it back. And so I think a lot of just like basic kind of resume 101 stuff is talking about things in ways of how you helped the company, how you helped your previous team, how you improved the product, like be very sort of results oriented with the stuff you're putting on your resume. And then the last thing is, it's sort of always been the advice, but I think a lot of us, especially people who are new to tech, who maybe are on their first or second jobs, who didn't have to go through like the bad times in 2001 or 2009. You have to be willing to network. You have to look at a job and say, okay, Amazon's hiring for this job. Doing the bare minimum of like going on X or going on LinkedIn or going through Instagram and figuring out like, okay, which of my friends have worked at Amazon or do work there? And like, it's a massive company. Almost if you've worked in tech, you probably have some friend that has crossed paths. And just like asking, do you know anything about this role or this department or this team? Or is there any way that you could give an internal referral? I think internal referrals are massive right now in terms of like who we're seeing get hired at X and a lot of our companies that we work closely with. And so just taking like the couple extra steps, it's kind of like emailing. Like cold email is a really hard tactic right now. That's the same idea as like putting your resume out there in a database and just like spraying it all over the internet and hoping that people get back to you. Like the thing that works is following up and personalized outreach and referrals. And so if you kind of take some of that same advice that you would think to like give to a sales team and you sort of apply it to your own career search, that's generally where I think the difference between finding a job in a month and a half versus spending 6 months finding a job comes from. And I think that honestly applies to most jobs outside of tech too, like retail and hospitality. And tech's a very small sector in the economy, but I think that same advice can apply to a lot of other roles as well.
I think maybe also putting yourself out there in terms of like putting content out there or like showing what you did, maybe you can attract more inbound opportunities. Or when you reach out to someone, they'll know what you did.
Yeah, 100%.
So like, let's talk about X. It's a very unique company that you work at. Broadly speaking, like how are you liking the company so far? Or what was the culture like now? Give us some idea.
Yeah. The company is super interesting because kind of under the hood, you have something like 200 engineers that are supporting traffic of like 560 million unique monthly visitors. So it's like this massive site. And it's a very small team. I mean, you look at some of the sort of functional teams relative to, I mean, we talked about LinkedIn, like I think X is like 30% more users than LinkedIn, right? And LinkedIn has like 4,500 engineers. We have 200, right? They have like 1,000 people in their legal department. We have like 30, right? So it's just, you operate at a much bigger scale than most sort of large technology companies that you can imagine. And so I love the culture of sort of being able to do more with less. And I think that we've really proven that is possible at X, like doing sort of big things with a very small team. You're able to move incredibly fast because there's essentially no management layer, which is pretty wild. So like a good example of this is like my title is head of product, but like on a day-to-day basis, you will find me like writing cold emails for our sales team to send and personally jumping on like customer support calls with companies. And I think that goes like all the way up to like Linda and Elon. I remember right after our company was acquired by X, I reached out to this guy whose title was like chief marketing officer, something like head of marketing. And I was like, hey, do you think like somebody on your team could help me with this deck? Like we need to present this to a big client. And he's like, yeah, here you go. Like I just did it right now. And then like later I learned like his title from Twitter 1.0 was like head of marketing or chief marketing officer. But he's just like the guy that like does all the marketing stuff now. Like, so it's kind of this amazing company where, you know, it's like, oh, you have like a big fancy title. Yeah. Who gives a shit? What have you done lately? And so that culture, I think some people absolutely hate that. And so you saw this mass exodus when Elon was, that's the culture that we're going to set here. And obviously he had to lay a bunch of people off because the company was sort of upside down financially. But I think generally what you have, I think particularly across product engineering and design, is you have people who are very in the weeds, working super hard to like keep X as a platform alive, but also continue to grow it into a bunch of other areas. I think other parts of the org, candidly, we still have probably a lot of 1.0 people who aren't working as hard, but I think the team that's kind of been brought in to sort of fix a lot of the advertising sales and stuff like that is doing a good job sort of cleaning that part of the business up. And there's still a long way to go. I think X as a platform relative to others has never been like the default place to run ads. And ads is just, it's a tough business. And so I think some of the stuff that we've done around like launching new business areas with a very small team and launching subscriptions, which has been wildly successful, is just like it makes for sort of a stronger company because our revenue is just higher quality revenue than sitting back and sort of relying on really big advertisers. So that's sort of like the culture. Some people love it. I really enjoy it. I like the sort of autonomy. Reporting to Elon is fun and challenging, which I think is what you want work to be. And so some people really do well in that culture and others hate it. And there's something out there for everyone. So definitely understand
How many,
that everyone's cup of tea.
You said there's like 200 engineers. So like how many PMs are, if you can share, like roughly how many PMs are there and like what do the PMs do?
I think I could be wrong on this, but I think it's like 5. I think that there's 5 people in product. Yeah. It's very small. It's interesting. My take is moving a little bit on this, but I think what you see across the like 5 or 6 product folks at X is basically all of us are some mix of very strong marketers, engineers, or designers that just happen to end up with a product title, a lot more so than like what you would see in sort of your traditional like product manager working with a project manager and a designer and a small pot of engineers. Like that's very much the culture that we had at Indeed, where I worked before. And that was like a 15,000 person company that operated in sort of a very traditional manner. And I think we had, I don't know, probably like 400 people in the company that had product titles. But yeah, here it's really small. There's like a product person that owns consumer. There's a product person that owns like enterprise and advertising. There's my sort of product title, which owns a lot of the like hiring and sort of like new business stuff we're working on. There's a product person who's overseeing like community notes and trust and safety. And that's about it. I think it's like 5 people. So pretty wild.
So there isn't any like making a bunch of internal decks or product reviews and that kind of stuff, right? You're just like shipping product, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, the way that stuff gets done is often like Elon will just screenshot stuff in the app and then he will DM it to me on X and be like, why does this look like this? Or like, why did we choose to go in this direction? And then we're just like DMing back and forth in real time about it. We do have weekly product reviews where we meet with him and we sort of do that in different groups. But yeah, that's sort of like the only time that I've built like a deck outside of something for a big conference or something. It's a very quick process. And essentially we have it down on our teams to be, we have maybe like 8 slides that we're going to present him. And each engineer is often like in charge of filling out their own slide or part of their own slide. And we sort of just like run through whatever the sort of top of mind topics are for that week. We'll sort of meet with him usually on Wednesdays and go through all that.
So like, what's it like working with him, man? Like he's running like 4 or 5 different companies. What does he really care about?
At a minimum, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, our thing is interesting because I think he's super aware of blind spots. Like he finds LinkedIn fascinating in terms of their business, but he had never been on LinkedIn. Like when he bought our company, he was basically buying a LinkedIn competitor and he had spent a lot more time like looking at our product than he had at LinkedIn. And so a lot of this stuff is like, he understands, I think he's quite good at understanding like where the blind spots are. And certainly like enterprise software that's serving the recruiting industry is one of those. There's a massive opportunity there, which I think he's very aware of. And so I think he is in some cases, he defaults quite heavily to teams where it's like, I don't know a lot about recruiting, but LinkedIn is doing $15 billion in recruiting revenue. Like we need to take a piece of that pie. You may not know a lot about audio and visual, but it's like the activity that we've seen on Spaces, even before he bought the company, was insane. Like can't get into details, but like the amount of like hours that people are spending hosting Spaces, sitting in Spaces before we ever did like any real promotion of that product was wild. It's like clearly, I think Twitter as a business, when he bought the company, was far behind on video. They were far behind on like a lot of the immersive advertising stuff that like TikTok and Instagram and Reels was getting very good at. So I think he's like very good about, he uses a lot of consumer stuff and he's like, I don't know a lot about this, but like we need to steer the ship in this direction. And if he doesn't know a lot about video and if our existing team doesn't know a lot about video, like we will go hire a bunch of people from TikTok and Meta and go figure out video. Like it's kind of as simple as that. And then there's other things that I think he feels much more personally in the weeds on and opinionated on because he is like the sort of power user of X as a platform. So with stuff like spam, it's this like never ending problem to crush bots and to crush crypto spam and stuff, which like, depending on who you ask and how you measure it, we've either gotten like way better on or way worse on, and that probably changes by the week. But there's stuff like that where I think he feels the pain personally because like I've sat in a room and watched him post on X. And like, you can literally see, like, as soon as he hits post, he gets 20 notifications. And it's like, well, humans aren't that fast at responding. So like, these are all like, you're just getting like thousands, tens of thousands of like bot replies on his posts. So it's, well, if this is happening on my account, then by default, this has to be happening to a lesser degree on basically everybody. So I think he's like very in the weeds on stuff like that. We have like an X payments division that we'll hopefully be able to announce more stuff on soon. And like, he founded PayPal. So he has like really strong opinions on payments and sort of like the rails of transmitting money. So it's kind of interesting. There's some stuff where he's like, I know we need to get good at this. Let's hire in the right people and sort of I'll listen to them and learn from them. And then there's a few things where he's super hands-on because of his, personal experience.
What are some like traits that he really values on other people? And what are some of his like kind of like pet peeves or like things that kind of rub him the wrong way? Do you have any experience with that?
Yeah. I mean, the interesting thing in working with him is there's always a way of kind of doing things faster. In some case, the result can be shittier and you have to push back on it. But I think one of the interesting things that I'm like very painfully aware of is in a lot of ways, we are like a very important platform, but our work from like a product and engineering perspective is the least important of all of his companies, right? If I'm in engineering in SpaceX and I don't do my job, like rockets blow up. If I'm in engineering at Tesla and like I screw something up with full self-driving and like a car runs into a bridge and kills somebody, like that's really bad. If I like work at Boring Company and I'm an engineer and a tunnel collapses and want a bunch of people, that's really, so it's like, if I'm doing brain surgery, neurosurgery at Neuralink, I have to be very precise. Like Twitter as a platform has always had like the fail whale and stuff like that. And so I think he has this, like in all of his businesses, it's like, if engineering doesn't do their job, really bad shit happens and people die. And so you kind of apply that to a social network or sort of this online town square. And like the same mentality kind of exists, that same like level of rigor and desire to sort of get things right. But I think he realizes that the stakes aren't that high and we can move a lot faster than some of his other companies. And like, if something goes wrong, worst case, the site's like down for a few minutes and we fix it and we learn from it. And so I think there's still this culture of just like shipping fast at all costs, trying to move really fast on these problems, understanding that like, if we get something wrong from an engineering perspective, it's not the end of the world. I haven't seen people get like fired over engineering mistakes. And so I'm sure that it's happened, but they'll be on my team. Yeah. And so there's sort of this culture of just like, let's just move faster than every other company. And by sort of shipping a lot of these features and fixing problems faster than anyone else, we'll sort of create a culture that, that users can count on to always have sort of new stuff coming down the pipeline. Yeah, I think that's the sort of like relentless desire to learn is really impressive. Like I said, I mean, he knew nothing about LinkedIn. He spends a lot of time like just trying to understand why Workday is a certain way or why LinkedIn does things a certain way. And so that's pretty cool to be able to like, I feel like I, in some ways, have been able to like educate him on a whole new industry. And so that's like an interesting feeling. But yeah, it's been really fun.
So he does has to listen to you and other people to learn, right? Like that's the kind of like, it's not just this goes off on his own and reads a book or something.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I've seen there's been in that spirit, there's a number of things where he or somebody else senior has made a decision. And I think that you get like a ton of backlash from it where like, oh, we're going to remove headlines from news articles, right? And at the time I was like, and basically so like an external news article would appear as like an image. And I think it was like super confusing. And that decision like created these massive ripples where people are like, oh, this is the stupidest, decision I've ever heard. And it's a really bad product decision. It's like that decision was made in 15 seconds in a meeting. And the desire to push back on that, where like I and other people were like, ooh, I don't know about that. In some ways, it's kind of easier to like try things because this is just like Elon's word versus my word. Like he's not inherently right because he's Elon and I'm not inherently right because I have an opinion on something. And so there's like a lot of stuff that you see, I think over the last year where the team will like put stuff out there. We will like listen to the outrage. We will monitor the situation and then very quickly like revert back if we're wrong. So like we killed like NFT profile photos the other day. There was like massive outrage about that from the like 7 people who still care about NFTs. And it's like, look, if this like damages the platform in some meaningful way, we will like listen to that. We will monitor the situation and we can always like revert back. Like code is very easy to like, these are all like reversible doors. And so I think hopefully people are seeing that a little bit with the platform. Like we try lots of stuff. We're wrong 49% of the time, and hopefully we're right 51% of the time. And that like ends up creating sort of a better product. In some cases, it's a super painful way to create a better product. But a lot of this stuff is like, we don't care about the sort of like small scale tests. Like, let's just roll this out, see how the community feels about it. And if we're wrong, we're like happy to admit that. And like Elon's very happy to admit that he's wrong. Yeah. And so I think that we've seen that over and over again.
That's awesome, man. I worked at Twitter briefly back in the 1.0 days, and it was very opposite. It was more like anything you launch has to be A/B tested at a small percentage and go through like 10 different reviews. And yeah, this new Twitter, like maybe you guys make some mistakes, but I'm sure it feels a lot more empowering for people involved to actually be able to ship stuff, for better or for worse.
Yeah. The velocity is definitely insane. And I think we're still working through some of those 1.0 processes. And I think some of this is very team dependent. I mean, we like the consumer version of X, or even the consumer version of Twitter historically, like there's so many like laws and stuff that we just have to be really mindful of. And so a lot of this stuff is like, why is this taking so long? At the end of the day, we're a platform with 550 million people, and there's regulators looking at every single thing that we do. And so it's like, we want to move fast, but we also have to move fast in sort of a compliant way. So I think like out of all of the teams that I would give a shout out to on that front, it would be our legal team. Like I don't know how they do it with such a small group, but they are like working very hard to move as fast as possible. But yeah, I think maybe in like the 1.0 days, like I've seen from like looking at the sort of deploy schedule on some of these things, like to sort of get the first version of communities stood up to like the first user publicly, it was like a year and a half. Like it was like a year and a half of like internal employee testing, stuff like that. Like I think we've had a number of features that serve sort of like the same number of people as communities did during that sort of like Twitter 1.0 launch that have been start to finish shipped in like 45 days. And obviously like the ramp up of communities now has been super fast. And I think that's just like big companies end up, it's sort of death by 1,000 cuts. Like that's how Indeed was. It took forever to get things out the door. The platform never really changed. We were sort of all about like advertising and revenue at all costs. And it was a very frustrating environment for engineers to work in. But yeah, like I said, I mean, that certainly has its place. And there are social companies that you can go to and work at that have that same culture. But it's definitely for a certain type of person who wants to have really fast velocity, but impact like a large number of people. This is sort of like a very unique company, I think, as it exists today.
Awesome, Chris. Well, thanks so much for talking about all these different topics. Where can people find you? I guess people can find me on X.
Yeah, find me on X at Chris J. Bakke. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, and you'll see all of my X content posted like 7 days later there. So X is probably the default place to connect with me. But yeah, if you're more of a LinkedIn person, I feel bad for you, but I also understand. So feel free to add me on LinkedIn as well.
Cool.